One way of looking at me, people are often like, wait a minute, you were an investment banker and then a advisor to the president. Now you have a robotics company, you make drones. Like, that's a lot of jumping around. But I don't see it that way. I see
Okay.
it as a continuation of one thing, which is I'm interested in the world economy. And then I try to express that in different ways. So at my
That was Pippa Malmgren, the author of The Leadership Lab. I first saw Pippa at a conference. She was giving a keynote on the global economy. It must have been 2008. The way she was connecting the dots, the way she was telling the story, I was immediately attracted to her. And since then, I've been following her work. Recently, I got together with Pippa to talk about her book, The Leadership Lab, what she's working on now, her thought leadership niche, and much more. Join us for this interview.
at my core, I'm an economist, although that sounds so boring, and actually it's so as an economist, I'm trying to understand, okay, how does this thing work? So I started going, I want to understand money. I don't understand how does, well, actually, to be fair, I started with trade policy. I kind of inherited that because my dad had been the chief trade negotiator for the United States under Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford. So I had a kind of childhood apprenticeship in that subject. So I knew about how trade worked. My dad used to tell me the stories of the shoes you're wearing. The upper part of the shoe will come from one country and the bottom, the sole, will come from another country. And then they send it to some third country where they stitch it together. And I just thought that was so interesting. So trade I got. Then I realized, but I don't know anything about the global financial markets. I have no idea about how money moves around. So that's why I went into investment banking. And when I got into investment banking, I realized public policy has such a huge influence on what moves prices. And so I started to spend a lot of time with policymakers. And then that led to becoming a presidential advisor during a very interesting period of history when we had Enron and 7 of the 9 largest bankruptcies in American history in one year, and 9/11 in another. So that was my White House experience. Then I came out and I was an advisor to a lot of investors, institutional investors, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, hedge funds. And in that role, I realized I can give my advice and I can be right, but I can't really make any money out of this because I don't have my own balance sheet. And so I need to create a company that will make money rather than me.
Okay.
And then so I started looking at ideas, and I was interested in automation, robotics, what was coming in artificial intelligence, because if you're into the world economy, these are the things that matter. And through having a lot of conversations with a lot of people, one of my clients also had an idea about actually creating digital robotic autonomous tools, drones initially, and we decided to create a business together. So that's my business partner. So now, instead of just talking about the world economy, I'm really proud to be part of building it. And I mean, really manufacturing. So I feel like all of them are an expression of really one thing. I've just tried to push out the boundary of how that manifests itself in my career. So yeah, technically I'm an expert on these different things. I've been very privileged to achieve high levels of influence in each of those areas. But it's the comprehensive approach that lets me see stuff that somehow other people don't see. People don't know how to shift from one area of expertise to another. And this is super important, especially now, because the world economy is going to demand that we all make very dramatic changes in how we work, what we're working at. You know, I mean, even without coronavirus, I was always being asked, you know, what percentage of the workforce will have to change due to automation and robotics? Because, you know, KPMG or PwC would write a report and it would be like, you know, 60% or 30%. And I'm like, it's 100%.
Okay.
100% of all humans will have to change as a result of these new technologies. So how do we get more comfortable with change is the question. And then get out of the mindset that you have one area of expertise and that you another one is a big deal. And I think this is a bigger problem or a bigger issue. You know, I think the last time we had what I'd call polymaths, meaning people who cut across many different subject areas, have a broad view. What Chris and I in the leadership lab called, instead of the deep dive into your specific subject area where you're highly analytical, this is about being parenthetical. The parenthetical is about the look across, connecting the dots between the silos.
Okay.
And so the last time we really prized this ability in society was in the Renaissance. And since the scientific revolution, we have prized the ability to dive deeper into the analytical data. But the problem is this is not giving us useful answers as much as we want. And you have to add in the qualitative to the quantitative, the parenthetical to the analytical. So I personally think that there's going to be a higher premium now on generalists than on specialists.
Interesting. Okay.
And coronavirus intensifies this.
Okay.
Because all the old rules of the game are broken. Like, you know, when do we go back to normal? Never. Like, this is a different ball game. Might have been playing football before, but this is golf. I mean, this is like a different thing, and we still don't know what it is. So the ability to be the look across, the parenthetical, and the person who has the imagination to connect the dots, these are the skills of the generalist. And I do think the generalist will be vastly more rewarded. And therefore, people can make that shift from one subject expertise to another, but they just find it very frightening because they're all focused on, well, how am I going to get a job?
Right.
And I think the answer is the more breadth, the more valuable you are.
Okay.
Not a number.
And so when did you develop the ability to tell stories? Because I did hear a key word. My dad told a story about the shoes, right? Do you think it goes back that far?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
And I know exactly where it came from.
Okay.
My mom.
Your mom,
And,
okay.
My mom was American from Los Angeles, and she was, you know, one of these Mensa type people, you know, very high IQ. Anyway, somehow she got into Oxford, where she studied Middle English with J.R.R. Tolkien.
Oh.
I mean, at 17. I don't know how this happens, but
wow.
She did poetry with Auden, and she did French poetry with C.S. Lewis, and she did Middle English, as in medieval English, with Tolkien. So you can't have a more ace storytelling background than this. So I grew up in a highly literary household, and I remember my mom, you know, something would happen. You know, I don't know, like somebody would get bullied at school, and she would say, that's like that scene in Shakespeare. That's when the two gangs of boys in the square in Venice, in Othello, you know, or not Othello, in Romeo and Juliet. That's that. You know, and so she kind of always was making clear to me the universality of our stories, and nothing really happens to you that hasn't happened before, and someone else has already explained it and given a twist, and that helps you understand your current world better when you see it through the eyes of other observers. So I think, I'm sure that's where that came from. Is
excellent. That's a good note for us to wind down on. Also, almost on time. I do want to say, when I read this book, that when I approached it, I thought it looks, since the chapters are small and they all have very unique headings, I thought this is going to be more like a reference kind of book. But I read it front to back as a single story, and it held up, even though you're jumping widely from different titles. And I would like to know, from a writer's perspective, was that was intended, or were you writing the different blocks and then putting them together later on, or what?
Very interesting question. So modern publishing, modern publishers tend to believe that you can have one idea, You get to say it in chapter 1, and then you have to hammer that thing to death for the following 11 chapters or so.
Okay, yeah.
That's the
I've heard that, yeah.
That's the usual approach, because the belief is the public are not interested, not up to it. You got to dumb it down. Luckily, our publisher, Kogan Page, took a very different approach and allowed us to write a book that really was about how to give yourself proper situational awareness.
Okay.
We realized if we're going to make the reader aware of what is happening in the world, we're going to have to cover a lot of different things. We're going to have to cover technology. We're going to have to cover economics. We're going to have to cover gender. We're going to have to cover almost spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
We have to hit a lot of different issues and give a 360 view. And so that's exactly what it is. It's a way of standing on a mountaintop and looking around the world, and suddenly you have a comprehensive picture of the landscape for people who mainly are looking straight down into some kind of microscope and unaware of the bigger picture. And I have to say, I don't think many publishers would have supported that. So we were lucky to have one that let us run with it. And one way we solved the problem of it being too much material or too diverse in its concepts was the little boxes. So the little boxes in each chapter that give you the nugget of information that you need from this chapter. And I have to say, that is one of the things people loved most about it.
Yeah. And it's good for the writer too to be clear on that before you start telling the story behind it. I noticed in the back where you juxtapose the old leadership styles to the new one. That is something I'm calling chartify, as a principle. Like, did you chartify these ideas before writing about them, or as a result of writing, did you come up with the old leader versus the new leader?
It came up as we were jamming about the book.
Okay.
And we reached a point in the conversation where we're like, it's really hard to say everything's changed, right? Because that immediately gets you to this time is different. And this time isn't different usually. So we have to be very clear in our own minds. What has changed exactly? And that list came out of that moment. But we were pretty far into it when we realized we've got to make an actual comparison of before and after. And we actually have 2 of those charts in the book of before and after. Things like before, adherence to the letter of the law was the right thing to do.
That's what leaders needed to do.
That's right. And after, adherence to the spirit of the law is what works. And you can say, well, for example, big corporations, they'll say, well, we absolutely adhered to the letter of the law, and that brought our tax bill to 0. And it goes, but that just feels wrong that a major corporation is making so much money and then somehow game the system and don't pay anything. And so this is a good example of letter of the law versus spirit of the law. And that's an example of the shift.
Yeah, great. Okay. So there's a final question. What are you working on now? The new book sounds like it's almost under wraps. So what's occupying your intellectual curiosity now? And where might that lead you?
Yes. Well, really 2 things. Building a robotics autonomous vehicle company is kind of a book. It's a creative enterprise. It's I am literally conjuring forth things that have not existed before, and ways of doing work that have not existed before. And that
probably feels really good, right? It's exciting.
Yeah, we're working with some of the biggest corporations in the world, the largest construction property firm in the UK, British Telecom, Intel, major corporations. So I get to work as well with some of the smartest, brightest people at the cutting edge of technology. So that's one. But I'm also writing, and my next book is about drones and digitization and the creation of digital twins, and what does that mean for society and how we work. And I'm very excited about it. It's a conceptual book, but I think it'll help people, because what's just happened with coronavirus is a digitization that would have happened over 10 years happened in weeks. So we have entered a digital world at a much faster speed. And I think there's a real need to explain to people, what does this mean for your personal life? What does this mean for you? What are the consequences for our society? And that's what I'm writing about.
That's what you're writing about. Oh, I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you so much, Pippa.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.